Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. A few weeks ago on the channel we looked at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo and measured the game up against the quality of Streets of Rage 2. Whilst both of these games are absolutely amazing, ultimately I chose Streets of Rage 2 as the better of the pair of games. The majority of the comment section would agree with the conclusion that I drew. However, I soon noticed another statement popping up, this time with Sega fans claiming not only is Streets of Rage 2 better than Turtles in Time on the SNES, but the version of Turtles in Time on the Mega Drive is better than the Super Nintendo one too. Obviously, as you probably have realised, these people are a tad confused, as Turtles in Time never even appeared on the Mega Drive, and instead Sega would get a completely different game in the form of the Hyperstone Heist. So this is the game we are going to take an in-depth look at today and measure up its quality in comparison to the Super NES classic. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist. The greatest Turtles game? Let's find out! Yeah! If you were a person born in the mid-80s or earlier, you'll certainly be able to remember how ridiculously popular Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was. Just like any popular kids TV show of the period, this would of course be translated into all sorts of other merchandise and entertainment mediums, with video games being an obvious source of income for the franchise. There would be many Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games, but it would be March 1991 that would see the release of a game that some consider to be the magnum opus of the series. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time would be a fantastic side-scrolling 4-player beat-em-up by Konami, topping all of the Turtles games that had come before it as a true all-time gaming classic. Just a short few months later, the game would arrive home on the Super Nintendo, and although this version of the game only offered 2-player cooperative play, many fans of the game cite this version as being even better due to the fantastic new stages and bosses that were added into the arguably more refined version of the title. Not often is a home version of an arcade game better, but a strong case can be made for this title to have achieved this feat. It would not be until December 1992 that the Sega Mega Drive would receive a Turtles game, and interestingly it would be completely different to what had appeared in the arcades previously. The game is supposedly completely different due to, at this point in time, both Konami and Capcom having exclusivity deals with Nintendo, which is why games like Turtles in Time and the original incarnation of Street Fighter 2 both never made it over to the platform. So a completely different Turtles game would be a way of circumventing this problem. Besides, Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo employed a lot of Mode 7 graphical effects, particularly in the news sections that were bespoke for the hardware, so a game more orientated for the Mega Drive hardware would be nice anyway. Upon starting a playthrough of this game, it is instantly easy to see why people confuse this game with Turtles in Time. The player select screen looks the same, and the game's introduction is very similar. Like Turtles in Time, the game starts out with April O'Neil reporting in front of the Statue of Liberty. Only this time around, instead of just stealing the statue, Shredder shrinks the entirety of Manhattan, instantly differentiating the game's stories for those who have played both Turtles games. The Turtles watch all of this unfolding on a television screen as Shredder announces to the world that he was responsible for the act and achieved this feat through the use of Dimension X's Hyperstone. This scene establishes the narrative of the game and gives the reason for the Turtles to set out on an adventure to restore Manhattan to its true size. The first stage takes place underground in what appears to be sewers, a location that is synonymous with the Turtles franchise. Once again, if you have played Turtles in Time, you will notice that this stage is completely different to anywhere that appeared in that game. But the turtle sprite animations, along with the foot soldier enemies, are identical to the ones found in the Super Nintendo game, straight away suggesting that Hyperstone Heist is a game that was created recycling many of the assets straight from the Turtles in Time game. But which of the two is better? Let's keep looking at the game to work out the answer. Players will also notice that the characters control the same. Pizza can be picked up and used to replenish health once again, and soon the wheeled robots from the Turtles in Time resurface on the opening stage too. The latter part of the opening stage finds the Turtles fighting their way through the streets of New York. Parts of this stage, including the backdrops, are identical to some of those found in the second stage of the Turtles SNES game. Like that level 2, this stage also has water spouting fire hydrants, but there are some completely new obstacles too, for example cars that can now run the player over. Still, there are enough similarities here to further explain why so many gamers get confused in believing that this game is a port of the arcade classic. Past this point, the first stage continues through another sewer, this time though in an area which is slightly more waterlogged. There are foot soldiers down here aplenty in a variety of different palette swaps. During this part of the stage, another familiar enemy resurfaces, the alien-like enemy who had appeared previously in the sewer surfing stage in the arcade game. The boss fight of the stage occurs against Leatherhead, a boss who is yet another recycled asset, previously appearing in the western themed Back to the Future 3-like level of the Time Travelling Turtles game. The next stage, known as the mysterious Ghost Ship, sees the turtles surfing across the open sea. The stage itself is new, but the mechanic is one again which has been recycled from the earlier game. There are some robotic flying enemies on this stage though too, that I never recall seeing before. After this, the character arrives on the ghost ship itself, which to be fair does look quite different from the ship stage that appeared in Turtles in Time, which we are simply going to refer to as TIT going forward for simplicity. There is a painting of Shredder hanging on the wall on this stage, and the sky in which we can see, through holes in the sides of the boat, is an eerie shade of purple. Ooh, spooky. The stage also features wooden barrels to dodge, as what would be a beat 'em up or fighting game without barrels, eh? Apart from just foot soldiers, even more familiar enemies from TIT arrive. Still on the same stage, the Turtles finally reach ashore, stepping off of the vessel and into a cave. Enemy sprites, crates of dynamite and falling stalactites can all of course cause a hindrance for the player when traversing through the level. A boss battle eventually occurs against Rocksteady. Whilst Rocksteady appeared in the previous game, last time he had fought alongside Bebop, and this time is at least wearing different clothes. He does not come up with much of a challenge for players. Moving into stage 3, or scene 3 as the game likes to call it, the player leaves the cave and apparently heads towards Shredder's hideout. The stage is laden with multiple familiar enemies as the Turtles head past a very Eastern orientated looking building. Eastern orientated? The Orient? See what I did there? The inside of this building comes with all sorts of traps and obstacles, and suddenly you may be starting to feel like you are playing a Game Goemon title, another great series of games developed by Konami. Whilst many of the obstacles appear old-fashioned, there is even the odd laser to dodge here and there. The boss fight takes place against a powerful human foe known as Tatsu, the first completely new boss character the game has introduced thus far. He has a range of projectile attacks and is proved tough to beat due to the onslaught of foot soldiers the player must take down simultaneously. Scene 4, known as the Gauntlet, takes place in yet another boring looking cave. This time however with a water covered floor so that the programmers could use the alien-like enemies once again. Early in the stage the player faces off with a palette swap version of Leatherhead, quickly suggesting that a gauntlet is going to occur against all 3 of the game's bosses. Assumptions would be correct, as palette swap Rocksteady is up next, followed by palette swap Tatsu. After these 3 bosses, the stage's true boss is revealed, an encounter against an airborne Stockman opponent, who unleashes hordes of robots against the player. The very end of the stage reveals the Technodrome, the location of the next stage. The Technodrome features a lot of recycled elements from the Technodrome themed stage within TIT. including the return of familiar obstacles. Halfway through the stage, a boss fight occurs against Krang, once again a boss from the Tit game. We then enter an elevator section, once again something we received in Tit and a trope that seems to occur in every beat 'em up that's ever been made. Eventually, when reaching the bottom of this shaft, a boss fight occurs against Super Shredder, the same final boss from the Turtles in Time game. After a tough battle, defeating him finally restores Manhattan to normal, cueing the end credits and restoring the universe of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles back to normal once again. So that was a quick look at every stage and important part of the Hyperstone Heist. So now we have seen it all, let us try and summarise the differences with the Turtles in Time game and try and conclude once and for all which of the two entries is a better game. Looking at the two games, it is very clear that many elements of the Hyperstone Heist were shamelessly recycled from Tit, almost in a heist-like fashion, making it abundantly clear that Konami must have assumed that the majority of consumers would not buy both games. Which makes sense, I suppose, considering not many people owned more than one console of the generation at the time back then. Due to this vast amount of recycling, it is easy to see why some people think the two titles are both the same game, or in even worse cases, why some even mistake the game as a butchered port of the arcade version. Analysing the Hyperstone Heist properly though, the game has plenty of unique elements, including mostly new stages, a completely different story and many new bosses. The title is certainly a different game altogether, but which of the two titles is better? Many write off Hyperstone Heist instantly due to the recycled nature of many of the game's assets, especially if the players have already experienced the arcade game. But if you try and look at the Mega Drive game completely isolated to what came before it, it's a very decent title. It is a great beat 'em up with probably only some of the Streets of Rage games being better options on the Sega platform. The Hyperstone Heist is simply that good, but it is difficult to put on the same platform as Turtles in Time due to the following reasons. Firstly, the two games' lengths. Tit appears to be a longer game than that of Hyperstone Heist, with a lot more stages and a lot more variety. The story narrative of travelling through time leads to a lot of environmental changes as you progress through the arcade and Super Nintendo Classic. The Super Nintendo version of the game mixes the title up even further too by adding all of the fantastic extra levels and utilising the advantages of Mode 7. Turtles in Time is a really special game. The Hyperstone Heist, although very decent in its own right, provides all of these elements, just in much smaller doses. Which is kind of amusing really, considering that the actual narrative story of the game is about shrinking Manhattan. The title does feel like a smaller and less epic experience. Still though, the amount of new stages and bosses ensure that the Hyperstone Heist is still worth a playthrough, whether you have completed Turtles in Time or not. So although I do not believe that the game is the best in the series, it is certainly a game that beat 'em up fans should play, even if you just want to look at what has been done differently this time around. Both Turtles in Time and the Hyperstone Heist come from an interesting period in gaming, where the same developer would release titles representing the same franchises in completely different forms, depending on the hardware. If only the console war between the Xbox One and PS4 had offered us all the same kind of diversity, eh? Then we would have actually had reasons to play on them. So to conclude, Turtles in Time is better, but the Hyperstone Heist is a game that still deserves your attention, so make sure you don't pass it up. If you enjoyed this video and want to watch more videos like this, I release at least 2 new videos every week and have years of in-depth content on my channel for you to go back and check out. Make sure you subscribe to the Top Hat Gaming Man today. Also let me know down in the comments which is your favourite Turtles game. I would be curious to hear your thoughts. Finally, my channel is partly funded by the generous donations I receive via Patreon. Patrons can earn a credit and a shout at the end of these videos. These people make working full time on YouTube just that little bit less scary, so I'd like to thank you all very much for that. Huge shoutouts go out to Carl Johnson, Sebastian Velez, SpongeMat B, House of a Ted, JD Robbins, Synth Spaces, Andrew Bazansky, Asobi Kwang DX, Michael Baker, Tom Elliott, Computer Man, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Daniel Daly, RetroReversing.com, House of a Ted, Dan Barlow Jr., Joel, and all of my other patrons. Yeah!